Have to give up chocolate or cheese forever. Which one?
So my gut instinct is cheese straight away because I'm not a huge cheese person anyway. And I am trying to cut back the chocolate, but I do like chocolate way more than cheese. But then I've got to think about all the foods that have cheese subtly in them, like your pizza and your pasta and all that kind of stuff. And how would that taste without the cheese? Like maybe that's just disgusting and wrong and I need the cheese.
Yeah, with this, would you allow for sort of cheese replacement, some of those, vegan other options, dairy-free cheese?
I mean, sure, go for it. It's probably disgusting, but you can have it anyway.
Apologies to any vegan listeners out there.
They know it's true.
Well, I've actually quit sugar. I quit it a long time ago. I'm not that strict about it. There's sugar in lots of sauces and things like that. There's natural sugars in fruit, which I'll still eat, of course, but added sugar, I don't really have it in my diet. So giving up chocolate, I've kind of already done. But having said that, there's something really special about chocolate. Like there is the world of confectionery and sweet stuff, and chocolate sort of stands on its own at the pinnacle of that. There's nothing really comparable to chocolate. Something about the richness and the smoothness. I don't know, it's just a very special food concoction, chocolate is. But for me, obviously the answer is easy. I would give up chocolate because I already have. I'm just trying to think like what I would miss the most if I gave up cheese. Pizza's the obvious one, but are there any other things that come to your mind like that cheese just really, really augments?
I think in New Zealand, there's a much more limited amount of cheeses, at least at the supermarket, right? I'm sure you can get your hands on lots of different sorts of cheese, but like the kind of standard New Zealand cheese is like Colby, Edam, Tasty, right? Living in Europe, Italy, France, and other countries just have so many different types of cheeses, and it's just a whole world, which I think maybe isn't as big a thing in New Zealand. And so just eating cheese by itself is pretty good, man. I love a pecorino with a bit of miele, a bit of honey together with the cheese, or like get some fruit sauces together with the cheese. Oh man, it's so good.
I think the difference is here, we don't milk anything with 4 legs. Like, it doesn't mean that if... like, if it's got 4 legs, it shouldn't be milked. Not necessarily. Yeah, you're right, though. We've got kind of like very bland cheeses. But for me, I quite like Edam. I quite like just standard cheddar cheese. Like it's all good.
Oh yeah, I like them as well. I think they have a really high base quality. They're quite bland and neutral. Like they're not very strong, and that's what makes some cheeses special. I'm not a blue cheese fan. I know that some people really are, and so there's like a million different types of blue cheese as well. But I'm not a fan of that. But like I really like sheep's cheese. I ate a lot of that in Italy, goat's cheese as well, and a lot of things that maybe in New Zealand we don't do as much of, even though we have so many sheep, could be a good idea, but So my choice, as you've probably imagined, would be cheese because I just eat way more cheese than I eat chocolate. Like that was my equation in my head. I'm like, which one do I eat more of? And I eat cheese every day or almost every day because I eat quite a lot of pasta with the Italian influence on my life. And I love having cheese on top of my pasta. I love pizza, and yeah, so I would rather give up chocolate, even though chocolate is amazing, and I agree with everything you said, Sam.
This has made me wonder though, what would it be like if there was a Willy Wonka of cheese? Can you imagine the Wonka cheese factory? How bad would that place smell? And like poor Augustus Gloop, who's like fallen in this molten cheese, like, yo, that is rank. But what would he be like? What would the cheese lord, Willy Wonka, the cheese man, be like? Billy Chonka. What's his name? I don't even know. There's surely a cheese pun there somewhere. Someone help me out.
Searching for it. It's gone.
So today we'll be discussing fromage. Oh, no, sorry. Welcome to the Lens and Veil podcast. Join Shem, Sam, and Zach as they dive into a designer-focused analysis of Cooper Island, a game from Andreas Odendahl. So in today's podcast, we'll be talking about Cooper Island. So Cooper Island is a worker placement euro with a really interesting resource mechanism as well. So in the game, you play it over 5 rounds, and each round is made up of 3 phases. In the first phase, players get to place, they gain income and get to place 2 tiles onto their own island, which they'll be exploring. These tiles are the main way of getting resources in the game. And then in the second phase, players will take turns placing out workers. There's two types of workers. You unlock the special workers later on, and they can do more powerful actions. And then there's the normal workers. Basically, each player takes turns in kind of classic worker placement style of placing to take an action. And then it's the next player's turn. If you place on top of someone else's worker, to do the same action, you have to pay them a resource. Some actions will give you a bonus if you're the first person to go there. And basically, the actions are split up into 4 actions, which are in some way building up your resources, kind of exploring your island and gaining resources in that way. And the other 4 actions, which are the main kind of 4 paths to scoring points, which is clearing ruins off your island and then building statues, cargo ships. So you're basically giving the resources for a cargo ship to be sent away to wherever your colonial original country is, because we're basically colonizing this new island. The third one is building buildings on your island. And the last one, last but not least, is building these boats, which essentially do your income in the first phase. You gain income from these boats. An interesting thing about all of these, though, is when, for example, you build a boat or a number of little actions that you do in the game, you also gain those resources instantly, not just as an ongoing effect. After all of that phase, the taking of turns, you go to the final phase, which is basically just a cleanup phase, where players will kind of like take their workers back and gain some points, some ongoing points for different things, which I'm sure we'll discuss later. And basically 5 rounds like this, and the game is over. So what did you guys think?
So I can recall 2 times at least where Mr. Macdonald here, Sam, has bought me games for my birthday. And these are games that I know of, I've seen, but have never really thought to buy or to try out at all. And then Sam's gone and bought them for me. And this is the second time it's happened where I've played the game and I've loved it, like straight away. Like, this is a fantastic game. How have I not played this game yet? The first time was It's a Wonderful World. For whatever reason, the cover, I don't know, just didn't really draw me in. But I love that game. Fantastic game. And then Cooper Island was the same, where it's one of those rare occasions in a game that we're in like round 2 of 5, and I already say, I want to play this game again, like straight away. I haven't finished the first game, and I want to play again. There's so much to talk about, so many cool things in this game from a mechanical point of view. But I think as a broad overview, one of the things that I think this game really does really well is it ticks kind of all the boxes of what players look for in a game. So what I mean by that is there's different things that board games can give us for enjoyment. So there could be the brain burn, it could be interaction, it could be a tactile thing, it could be the visual look of the game. And this game, while it doesn't like maybe exceed every single thing in like extremes, it does provide all 4 of those things. It's got a lot of brain crunch. It looks quite nice on the board, has a good presence. The art's, not ugly. It's nice, it's good. And then like the chunkiness of the tokens, the stacking up of your tiles on your board gives that tactile feel. And the interaction, while it's not huge, is still there and it's still important. So I think that's why this game just kind of like has that nice feel to it. Like it just kind of ticks everything. And I think it should have a broader appeal than it does, because I think it is going to appeal to a wide range of people. But for whatever reason, this game has just not really been noticed by a lot. And that's kind of why we're talking about it, right? This is a game that we played and we thought, this is great. This is a really good game. Why does no one know about this game?
Yeah, you mentioned something, Shem, where it was like in your first play, you had that feeling, man, I want to play this again. And I had the exact same feeling. Now, there are some games that really impress me that I'm thinking while I'm playing the game, I'm really enjoying this. I'm loving this. But this was a slight different feeling, the feeling that actually I want to try this again. I think there's something interesting there. What do you think was the driver of that wanting to play it again whilst playing for the first time?
I think a lot of it comes back to like the fact that this game is quite tight. And I think, Sam, you and I generally lean towards more tight games and big open games, depending on the game, of course, but games where you really have to optimize your turns. You have to be quite clever and planning forward. So in a game like this, for your first game, you get to round 2 and you're like, I've made so many mistakes. Like, can we just start again? Because I know I've screwed up already. And the thing is, you get that in almost every time you play this game. So it's not about experience. It's about like this game is tight and there's this enjoyment that comes out from actually doing well. And it's not about luck. It's not about, little breakthroughs and moments. It's about you as a player doing well. It's really satisfying. So, and you can play this game casually. Like it's not a super competitive game. You can just play it and enjoy it. And oh, yeah, I got 20 points. That's cool. But I think the players it's going to appeal to are the ones that do want to really like eke out every little point they can find in the game.
Yeah, I honestly think one of the biggest factors for me personally, but I think it's actually maybe that key to that wanting to play it again is the resource system, building up your island. Because the thing is, it's just not like, it's not as transparent as a game where it's like, oh, I get this many resources if I go over here, and then I'll be able to convert those. Like you're trying to build up your island and optimize the amount of resources that you get. So essentially, just as I didn't explain it in the explanation, the higher you stack up your island, the more a resource on top of that island spot is worth. But when you spend it, you get to spend it once. You can't divide it between things. So you want to be also optimizing the moment that you're spending that resource so that you're not wasting resources. So like that whole puzzle is just so challenging, but also satisfying because you're seeing like your little island grow up and be constructed. And then there's these other twists in it where like the point scoring things like building buildings and building statues, you have to place them on your highest stack that's available. And so you've been building this engine up of resources, essentially building that stack up and using the resources. And now you have to block it to be able to score points, which, is kind of in a similar vein, in a weird way to kind of like what you guys did in like Architects or in Circadian's First Light, where it's like, this is your worker, it's earning you stuff, and now to score points, you need to get rid of it. You need to lose it. And that's quite a cool little twist, because if you do that in the wrong moment, it's going to mess up all your momentum. And so trying to figure out when's the right moment to build the building, to block that stack, and can I pivot into another stack quick enough?
I really agree. And I'm always looking for, when I'm playing games, for these delightful and organic ways that the designers put in rubber banding. So slowing down the leader. Games like Quacks of Quedlinburg, they have rubber banding in the game where people can catch up nicely. But that way with the rat's tails, like based on how far away you are from them on the points track, I would say that's an inorganic way of doing it. It's a very forced way. It works in the game and it's cool. But I love these ways that are rubber banding that the player might not even think about or realize. It's just very subtle. So as you say, in Architects, you're spending a worker forever whenever you do those point scoring actions. In this, really, really interesting that you're spending a resource from your big stack, which is worth a lot of resources. But then when you build, you must build on your tallest stack, one of your spots with your tallest stack. And that's going to slow down the person who's snowballing. And it's a very juicy and delightful organic way of putting rubber banding in the game without it feeling forced and without people being able to sort of see behind the curtain super easily. Looping back to Shem's point about the replayability of the game, I think it's a really interesting concept that as game designers, I think we actually want to make room for players to misplay in games. We don't want them to feel frustrated and feel like they've got no hope and they've completely ruined their game. But we also want them to feel like at the end of the game, if they had just sequenced these things a little bit more differently, they could have squeezed a little bit more juice out of the game. And I think that's a really, really good feeling to have in a game. And I think this one, Cooper Island, like you're not going to end your first game or even your fifth game feeling like you sequenced everything to perfection,
I wonder how much of that is more of a personality thing, though. We know each other well, so we kind of know what we expect from a game and what we want from a game. But I've often played games with other people, or even with my kids, where if they have a bad first game or a game where they feel like they didn't do very well and they think it was their fault, they don't want to play again because they felt bad. Maybe that's true of other players. They'd rather have a game where it's like the game kind of lifts you up at the start and you feel like you're doing well or better than you are. Maybe that's something that some people actually want in a game. I don't know, but it definitely appeals to me. This thing of like, it's weird though, because there are games that are just so punishing and it's not fun, right? Like you play it, you could do better, but you don't care because it was just a harsh game and it wasn't that fun. Whereas something about this game, I think maybe it's what you're doing in the game, the look of the game and everything. There's a satisfaction there regardless of how you're doing. And also the fact that the points aren't so obvious. Like, you don't actually know how you're doing. It's quite a weird thing in this game where you get to the end and you go, what did I score? And like, I think my first game was 17 points. I think the highest we've seen was from you, Sam, was like, was it 40 or something around?
Not even that high, I don't think. Yeah.
Like maybe it was 30s. So the scores are not high. The points track are these ships that you move around the outside of the island. Every 5 steps you pick up a little boon, a little reward, but that's how you track your points. And there's a few other little end game points that come in from cards and from other things in the game. But largely the points you get, you aren't really kind of thinking about how to score in the game. You're just trying to think about how can I get this next objective? That's the main thing you think of in this game. You start with these 4 little tiles on your player board, and it says once you've built 2 things, you get this little bonus, which is usually getting a new worker or upgrading a worker. And once you've done 2 statues, get that thing. Once you've done 2 boats, get that thing. And then once you've done 2 of these cargo ships, get that thing. So there's these 4 things you're aiming for, and the game is telling you very early, do one thing twice, and then do one more thing twice, and so on. So that's what you're really focusing on. And you're not thinking, oh, because it's worth 5 points. You're thinking, like, because I want to feel like I'm achieving things. So the game does a really good job of hiding this, like, point scoring in the game, which I think does help the enjoyment factor of the game, where you're not trying to go, oh, I'm losing because you're 10 points ahead of me and I can't catch up. And I can see I can get 2 points here, but it's not enough. And this game doesn't have that. You're not trying to, like, hunt for points. You're just trying to optimize every turn you can, which is really cool.
Yeah, I totally agree that the point scoring not being as transparent does make the game less like, oh, I'll just do this because this is going to be the most efficient way to get points, right? Like there's some games where you're kind of like estimating your points per turn, whereas in this, it doesn't feel like that at all. It's like you're trying to achieve certain things and then hoping that that's going to get you enough points to do well, you know? And I wouldn't underestimate either the building up of the island, because you finish the game and your island is not like it was at the beginning. You know, like it started as being this flat thing, and now you've got it built up. There's buildings on top, there's statues on top, and it's pretty. Like it's like, wow, I built that over the course of the game. So there is that sense of satisfaction that you built something as well, which you don't often get in board games, but I really enjoy it when it's there.
The other thing with the points that I liked how they're hidden was that like you're placing out these little tiles around your map, like Zach mentioned earlier, and each tile you place that goes on the outside of your island is placing down a little reward you get when a ship crosses it. But not just your ship, it's any ship. So if Sam comes around the coast to my islands, he crosses my little tokens, he's getting those bonuses. So quite often when you see points in the game, like if you do this, get a point, you're not thinking about, oh, that's a point because I need points. You're thinking, oh, that's a point to move my ship, to get that thing, to get that gold I need to then do the other action, which, yeah, again, it just comes back to like, it's not really about the points. It's about the little things you get along the way on your little journey of making your island.
I think that's just really clever because we've often put like little bonuses when we've had points tracks, like in Chaos Order, there's little bonuses along the points track. But this is like dynamic bonuses along the points track that the players are choosing to put out. And they can put them out in one direction towards a certain player and another direction to another player. The order's different. So it's like, it's just a really clever little design twist in there.
And that sort of leads to my like ultimate thoughts about why I think this game is so good. And there's kind of 2 factors to it. One of them is it makes point scoring fun again. And the other is it makes resource gathering fun again. And so, like, back in the day, you just take a game like Lords of Waterdeep or Stone Age, where, you know, you're placing workers, and it was kind of fun to just gather the resources when we were new to all of this stuff, like gathering resources. But now I'm so used to bumping up tracks and unlocking tokens and doing all these other things that whenever I play a game and my whole action is just to gather resources, I'm usually like a little bit sad about it. Like I feel like there was a waste of a turn. And similarly, points, they're supposed to be the whole point of the game. They're the whole impetus behind a lot of these Euro games, that ultimately that is the one resource, the one thing that matters at the end of the game is points. And somewhere along the line, taking an action just to score points ceased to be fun for me. Like I didn't want to take an action just to score points. I wanted to take an action that would upgrade me in some area or boost me up a track in some area. And so what we do in our Euro games is we give people rewards like those things, and then we compensate that by making it worth points at the end of the game as well. But here in this game, they've actually managed to make simply getting points fun, which is really cool. That moving your boat around, there's this sort of tactile element, seeing the progress more than just a straight up track, and also what bonuses will I get along the way. You're also interested when other people move their boat, because if they move past your port, they will give you a resource as well. So I think that's genius, making points fun again. And then resources too. Like, you're not just gathering resources, you're building up, as Zach alluded to, this whole mini game, this tactile experience on your island. You're building up these resources on top of each other, getting more and more bonuses along the way. As they go higher and higher, those resources become worth a lot more. So I think that they've done such a great job of making these two things, which sadly have become a little bit mundane in Eurogames, really exciting again.
I always appreciate in games where they have like one resource that has various states. So like if it's here, it means this. If it's here, it means that. In this game, you have the cubes, which are your main resources, and there's also coins. But the cubes like represent, I think there's 4 different types, like wood and stone and cloth. There's 5 actually, isn't there? There's gold as well. So gold is like a more premium resource you can get from the mountains, whereas you'd usually get stone. But on your island, like we've already said, that's the height of the island or height of that hex that determines the value of that piece. But as soon as you bring that piece back to your little player board, into your warehouse, it's now worth a single 1. So there's this nice management of like, oh, if I leave it out there, it's worth more. But if I bring it back, I can then like use, I can build on top of that, or I can put a building there, or whatever it might be. And then there's this other area at the bottom of your player board. It doesn't actually end the game too much, but it's there for good reason. And I think it's called the market in the game. I could get them back to front, but I think it's the market, where some resources can enter there, often through conversions or through bonus actions. But you can only use those if you have space to bring them up before paying for your actions. So I like how there's these kind of 3 spots where your resources can sit, and they kind of have a different use and sometimes a different value based on where they are.
Yeah, and it's a really clever resource puzzle in terms of optimizing your spending. As I said before, like often you end up overspending for things. Something costs 4 stone and you end up spending 5 or 6 because that's like the stack that you have. And then you're like, oh man, I just wasted 2 resources, but I had to. Like, there's no other thing I could do. Or you get into the point where you need to somehow spend resources out of your storehouse or whatever it's called, so that you can move resources from your market into it before the round end, when your market gets cleared, and you'd lose those resources. So there's some mini games there about resource management going on at the same time.
Yeah, it's nice when resources aren't just so like 1 for 1. Like as an opposite example, in say Raiders of the North Sea, everything is like down to the point. I know like a card is worth whatever it is. I think it's worth like 0.25 a point. A silver's worth half a point. Like everything has a value to it, and everything in the game adheres to those values. When we came to balance architects, it was a much harder game to balance, because you can't just say that a wood is worth 1, because on one turn I get 1 wood for 1 worker, next turn I get 2 wood for 2 workers. So like how much a resource is worth changes based on the game state and what the players are doing. And this game's the same, where like if they're balancing a cost of something, oh, this costs 5 wood, that could be 1 action for a player. I just place this tile, here's my 5 wood, done. Which one player's like, how can I get 2 more wood? It's so hard to get 2 wood in this game. And like, I love that, because it's again bringing you back to those first few turns. You're like, if I'd done this differently, I would have had a better reason to, resource gathering area on my board, and getting 5 would be easy. If I'd not placed that building on that spot to block it, this wouldn't be a problem right now. So it just kind of, that dynamic nature of the resources really makes the game shine.
And I think that comparison is actually quite apt, like the comparison of the resource gathering in this to the worker investment of architects, because, you would place a tile down the 4th level forest, the wood's worth 4, you try and spend that straight away, and then you place again, you've got 5 more wood. But then once you build a building on top of it, it's essentially like your workers just got captured, right? That has been shut down at the forest, you need to start again, So it's been alluded to as well that this game is quite tight. And I think the tightness is not in how many resources players can gather, because they actually can gather a lot. But the tightness is I think it's in 2 areas. The tightness is in how much things cost. So I think that the costs of buildings and statues and income boats, the costs are relatively high. And also the actions where you trade, I forgot what they're called, the
cargo ship.
The cargo ship action, yeah. So all of those action costs are actually really high in my mind. And the other tightness is in how many turns you actually get to take. This is a game where, even though it might be kind of long, you don't actually take that many actions. And you have the feeling right from the start that you really want to optimize and make the most of every single action that you take. How do you guys feel about that sort of tightness in the game? Like the resource costs, the gates for doing things that are really cool, being quite high?
I think it is the reason why what we talked about before, like your first play of the game is not very good, and then you get a lot better because the game allows you to earn a lot of resources, but only if you're actually optimizing your island and planning ahead and thinking about how you're going to build it up and building it up high. And in the first place, you probably won't be that good at that. And so then you're going to struggle to get enough resources to build multiple buildings, like in my first game, I think I built 1 or 2 buildings, and in my second game, I managed to build 4. Focusing on buildings. So there's a big difference from one game to playing another game the day after. So I still had it fresh in my mind and just trying to be smarter from the beginning of the game. So I think those high costs allow that skill, like you to build up in skill. I think if things didn't cost very much, then it would just be like too easy,
Yeah, it's definitely not a game where you're going to have excess resources at the end, unless you're just playing really poorly. The game doesn't really allow you to have extras. The only way would be if you had an island full of resources, but at that point, why aren't you spending them, I guess? But yeah, they do cost a lot. When you guys both built a fortress in our last play, I still have not built a fortress. I got close one game, and then they're so expensive. But they are worth 4 points. So that's quite significant and worth going for. In the last play, I did all 5 of the cargo ships just because I wanted to see, can you do it? And it was so hard. And I took a couple of moves kind of sideways just to make it happen because I wanted to end up doing it. But it was my highest score to date. So there's something there, right? Like if you really try and push for something and you achieve it, it's probably the game's going to reward you. I like the tightness of the workers. That's a tried and true mechanism of worker placement. Like just give them barely any actions and good luck kind of thing. I've done a bunch of games like this myself, which are very limited in actions. Even like Noctiluca, small little dice game. There's only 24 actions in the entire game divided amongst all the players. So in a 4-player game, you get 6 turns each. So it's very tight. But it's fun. When you know that you have that few actions, like Storm Raiders, another example, you get 12 actions per game. You really know that these actions matter. And so as a player, don't just go, oh, I'll just go here, I'll just go here. You think about it, and it's really important to master it. What I think the game does well, though, is it offers these bonus actions, these actions you can take on your turn through various methods. And the energy building that can come in through income and things like that. So while the tightness is there in the action taking, if you're playing well or if you're focusing, the game's like, here, have this little extra. Here's a bonus you can help yourself with. You can spend this cartography point to get around the corner and make the next action more beneficial. So it's kind of like, it makes the basic action taking tight and simple. And yeah, honestly, the actions are quite basic. Draw a tile, place a tile, or do this one little thing. But it's those bonus actions so it's where the crunch comes in. There was, I think, that second round or third round of our last game where I had 2 of these little cargo ship tiles, which do little bonus actions, and my brain was just spinning. There are so many possibilities for what I use these for and how that could impact future actions. And my brain was starting to mount quite a bit. But that's the fun part, right? That's trying to figure out and master it and really eke out those points.
Part of me thinks that, if I had been designing this game, I would have made the costs and everything just a slight bit cheaper. But then I think that what would happen is players would have a little bit more instant satisfaction, but they would end up with less satisfaction at the end of the game and less of that desire to improve and to come back and replay it. So I think I would actually ruin it. But to me, my instant thought was that these costs are really high. How do I make this happen? But I think the designer actually wants players to be in that frame of mind. How do I make this happen? And they're really having to figure out how to achieve their goals. And the goals are really clearly set by the way that you unlock new workers. And that's really set on the player board. So it's a really good direction for players. I just find it so interesting, the economy of things. I wonder, Shem, maybe you in particular, have you ever decided to completely change an economy in one of your games, made everything a little bit more expensive wholesale or made everything a little bit cheaper? And I wonder, and if it's changed, how the game feels to play.
I'm trying to think of actual examples, but I can't think of anything straight away. I often lean towards the low numbers for resources, just so that it's more manageable, I think, as a system. So you don't start paying 20 of something or 30 of something. It's always just very small numbers. And these aren't huge numbers in this game. It's 5 or 6 is the most you'll pay. But it's about how do you acquire that resource is the hard part of this game. How do you get 6 wood? It's by placing your 6th wood tile on your playboard. Easy on your map. But that's not always easy, right? If you haven't built it up, it's going to take a lot of time just to slowly cover those tiles and build up and get more wood from your resources. So there's a few bonus actions that can like get you a resource, or you can trade in, or you can do these little things to get around it. But now I'm not sure if I can think of an exact one where I've changed a resource system. I know I've changed interfaces of games for resources like Scarbray and stuff, where it's gone from cards to wooden tokens and stuff, but completely changing the resources. I know we've dabbled with it a little bit with in the development or early design stages of games. So like Inventors, that went through a variety of different resource systems to start with. We experimented with like different shared pools, and then eventually landed on the system that we've got now with the craftsmen, and spending silver to pay for those craftspeople. But nah, it's a very interesting game for sure.
I do remember one example actually was that very early version of Architects. To build buildings, there was also a coin cost as well. And we eventually got rid of it. I think it was your idea, and added the apprentices just as a prerequisite. So you do need to pay coins to hire the apprentices, but you've actually taken that coin cost away from the building, or just kind of replaced it in a different way. But that's the only example. Like, I just think that it would be quite interesting to experiment with a game, kind of wholesale changing the economy, making everything a little bit more expensive, adding inflation, or the other way around, and seeing how it feels. That's kind of, I guess that's a little bit of a tangent.
No, it's a good thing to test though, right? In design, if things are just too easy, just try raising the cost by one for everything. Or like, I think we've easily done that before in games where you just slowly increase the price of something.
Going back to the 4 main paths of scoring, so it's buildings, boats, cargo ships, and statues. I found the synergies between them quite interesting, and I'm not sure I've completely rocked it, but it feels like doing some of them makes you want to do other ones that don't necessarily synergize with it, whereas like doing things that, I don't know, for example, like doing the cargo ships and the fortress is good, or doing the fortress, just going full buildings is good. You're wanting to build buildings and statues on top of your towns, and it's going to take away your cloth, so you're going to be transferring that cloth into money. Like, I still haven't got my head around like what is the best synergy between paths, and maybe that's the key, is that there is no best synergy. Like, they all kind of have weird synergies with each other. I'm not sure if you guys have some more insight from a few more players.
I think it's part of the appeal of the game is like going into it, because it is a strategy game. There's not really much information or new information to add to the game other than a few card draws here and there, but they're very, very friendly card draws. Draw 4 and keep 1. So there's not a lot of information that's like random. So you can really go into this game knowing like what your opening moves are going to be, and no one's really going to mess with you too much. There's a few little minor random elements that could kick in, but for the most part, you can go, all right, this game I'm going to build all of my ships, my little boats. Or this game, I'm going to try and do all those cargo ships, whatever it might be. You can go into it and choose that, and that's quite fun. Because that last game for me was, let's go and do all the cargo ships. Can I do it? And Sam, I think after our last game, you were saying, oh, next time I'd love to try and do all of those little boats, and maybe I'd build up the forest and the village, yeah, to try and get the coins from that. So you can actually, it's one of those games that you can think about and debrief afterwards about how would you achieve this kind of strategy? Like, what's the best way forward? How would you build your map to help support that strategy? When would you pivot? What else would you support it with from another angle? So, yeah, it's really cool. Lots of cool things like that where you do find yourself like running through your mind, like, how would you make this strategy work?
Yeah, and that's the kind of energy that we were looking for when we were designing Viscounts. We wanted players to experiment with the clerics and experiment with the nobles and the merchants and the builders, and then try and find synergies between 2 of those actions, or all of them, or, players to dabble with different strategies each time they play. And this is something that I'm looking for in games, that feeling of I can't do it all. I can go really hard on one of the things, one game, and then try going really hard on another game. I just want to talk a little bit about why I find each of these 4 point scoring actions cool in their own like different ways. So the buildings, they give you a passive power. You get to like draw some cards and then choose what it's going to be for that building. And the other thing is that they're going to unlock a space on your player board to be able to hold more resources, or to be able to hold more statues, or the fortress giving you a much, much stronger ability. The statues and ruins, I think they're really cool because they are blocking your island's sort of exploration and resource gathering potential. It blocks 5 different spots on your island, which makes the puzzle of laying these dominoes, this hex dominoes on your map, a little bit harder. So you want to clear those out for more space. Once you've cleared them out, you think maybe it's worthwhile building these so I can start generating points each round. And points income is really fun in this game because you get to move your boat every round. And I think that can be pretty strong. The cargo ships are awesome because they give you access to extra actions, extra free actions. There's a lot of versatility and a lot of options that you have with this. I remember, Shem, on one of your turns, you were like, man, there are so many things I can do right now with these 2 cargo ships. Like, all the possibilities are kind of endless. So that's really cool. The underrated thing about the cargo ships, and then also when I pivot to the income boats, is that they are not covering a hex on your island. So you might spend big in order to gain this, but you have not blocked it with a building or a statue. And so that's something that it took me a lot of plays to realize, these could actually be really strong, just being able to keep maximizing my island. And then the income boats, as has been already addressed, like you get this income every round, so fantastic, but you also get that income when you build it, and you get some points when you build it. So it's even appealing to do in the last round because you could go for a really expensive one and get 3 or 4 helm points when you do it. So I think that all of these paths are interesting in that they give you different kinds of immediate and ongoing bonuses. So there's this multi-way of engine building, like we discussed on the Scythe episode, where, man, the players just want to experiment with these other ways of engine building each time they play.
And bringing back the conversation about tightness a little bit, unless you've got a special worker or some other bonus action, you can only do one of these things per round. Like you can only either clear one of these statues off the rubble off your map or build a statue. You can't do both. There's a tile you start with which you can place, which can let you draw one off, and you can build as your action, but you can't build 2 per round. You can't build 2 of these little boats per round. The game kind of restricts that from happening, other than minor little bonuses here and there you might be able to pick up. So it's very tight. You can't just go into the game going, I'll build 3 buildings in the last round, because the game won't let you do that. So you actually, if you're going to focus on buildings, you need to hit one every round and hopefully get a bonus one or something. That's kind of what you have to do. So, and then there's all the timing of the players, right? Like, if I want to build, so I'll wait, I'll do that next, but I'll go here. Zach went and he built. Now I have to like give him a resource because I want to go on top of where he went. So that brings that nice little sprinkling of interaction as well, knowing what players are doing. But yeah, it's very tight, and it makes those paths that you're talking about, Sam, like quite hard to achieve. You have to be so focused on them. Like you can't just kind of willy-nilly go through this game. And so the game is making it hard for you to do one thing a lot, basically. That's what I'm getting at. And the objectives in the game, these sort of tokens we see about where you get 2 of something, are telling you that you should do 2 buildings, 2 statues, 2 ships. At least like 3 pairs is probably like quite expected, I guess, in the game. So the game wants you to diversify, but as a player, if you want to focus heavily on one thing and achieve its full potential, it's quite hard to do.
Yeah, and just going back to that, how many workers did you unlock thing? I found it quite interesting in our second game together. It was, I think you guys had played more games before. I only unlocked 2 of those objectives. You both unlocked 3. And I took 1 extra worker and then 1 special worker. So I entered the game with 3 workers, whereas I think Shem might have had 4 workers. Or did you just have... I think you both had 4 and I had 3. But the scores were 28, 27, 27. And it was just really interesting to see, like, it's not just who unlocks more workers is going to win the game, but actually just, like, focusing harder on 2 scoring, should I say, paths could be equal to diversifying more as well. And I had that impression after those plays that the game is very balanced, and that all paths can lead to victory if you play them well. So that was a good feeling as well, because it's an intense game. It's heavy. It's got lots of choices, but at the end of the day, you want it so that any of the choices could lead you to victory if you play them well. You don't want to feel at the end like, he went that path and it was just easier and he won.
Yeah, and on the topic of workers, like a lot of games, like say if you start the game with 3 workers and you can get a 4th or a 5th. Like that jump up for players is usually huge. Like when one player gets an extra worker, it's very noticeable. But in this game, there's things to consider. Like you have to pay these workers every round for one. So you might need 1 or 2 more food to actually pay this worker, or you're losing points essentially. And also with more workers, you're then also often going on top of other people's workers more often. So you're paying more resources. So while this extra worker might be like really cool, it may be costing you like 3 resources per round that you don't actually consider. And was the action actually getting you back something equal? Who knows?
That's just another example of the organic rubber banding in this game. Like, it's not a forced thing, count up who's in the lead, make sure that everyone else gets more stuff. It's like, no, this, if you're doing really, really well, you've got more upkeep and it feels kind of natural.
I also love the choice in the workers. So there's 2 workers that just cost a little bit more food. And then there's 2 workers that cost a lot more food, but they give you 1 point per round if you can feed them, if you can feed all your workers. And I really love that choice of being like, oh, I really want to get a point per round, but will I be able to feed my guys? And if you don't feed your workers, then you get negative points. So like there's so many good little decisions in this game. It's not only the big decisions which are really good, but also just these little decisions that you're making are interesting, they're enjoyable, they're tasty, they're kind of these little morsels that you're getting throughout the game. And even like we talked a little bit earlier about the cartographer points, all right? So these are these points, this other resource that is not limited by your storage. It's like a little track that goes up to 6. And you can basically spend those to at any time build 1 tile anywhere, or you can also spend them if you're placing down a 2 tile to prop up one side of it to basically go a level higher. And oh man, like the ways that you can kind of like spend them, but you can only do 1 per turn. And so you're like, how should I spend it? What resources should I grab before doing my action? But if I spend all of my cartographer points, then where am I going to get them back from? There's all these little mini puzzles going on all throughout your turn. And that's what makes it really satisfying for me as well. It's not just those main actions, but it's all the little things around it.
There's another little minor kind of theme running through the game from I wouldn't say mechanical, maybe production point of view, which I quite like. And it's very subtle, but I'll just put it out there anyway. Is that a lot of things in the game you can't get all of them. So for example, you can build 5 little boats, but you start with 6. You will place 5 of your 6 tiles around the outside of your island. And there are 4 workers you can kind of get or upgrade essentially, but you can only do it 3 times. So I just like that little wrinkle in the game that's always in a lot of areas of the game where it's like you never get everything. You can get everything but 1 in quite a few areas of the game. So I think it's like those kind of little touches and little consistencies within games are really nice. It just makes the game kind of feel, from a product point of view, a lot cleaner and just, it's just nice.
So just kind of like one little niggle that I have, or question maybe, as a game designer, there's kind of a few like little rules that I understand that they maybe slightly balance the game, but I kind of have the question is like, is that little extra bit of balance in the game worth the rule? So I'll give 2 examples. So one is limiting the cartography point use to once per turn. Now your cartography is already limited by a maximum of 6 points. And there are some actions you can do for 1 point, but they're not really that good. And you're mainly going to be trying to do actions that cost 3 or 4 points. So I don't like, I mean, sure, someone could be like, oh, I'm just going to go 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, and spend almost 6 points and place out like 6 1 high tiles. But like, I don't think that's necessarily even that good. So you're already being limited by points. Why do you need to be limited by the number of times you do it as well? And the other example I have is about scoring points with your ships. Now you have 2 ships that go in opposite directions around the board. And when you gain points from a certain source, you can only spend those points to move one of the 2 ships. You can't split up the points between the 2 ships. I don't know. I just find those rules kind of unnecessary and maybe hard to remember as well. Like, for example, the cartography point one, I remember in my first game, I totally forgot about that rule and then had to be told it afterwards. The ship's point one, I think I only realized that after my second game that was a rule, and I probably did that wrong as well. So, like, are these little rulesy rules really worth putting them there?
I would say that there must be a reason for it, for sure. Like, we can speculate what we want to about why they're there. My rationale, there'd be a few reasons, I think. For the ships, I can think of 2 reasons why those rules would be there. One would be to create a little bit of tension and a little bit of you can't have everything at once kind of feeling. So like you would otherwise you just move both ships at the equal pace to get rewards along the way and hit that 5-point threshold each time at a similar rate. Whereas often you go, oh, actually, if I don't move that ship, this ship's going to go further. If I move that ship, it's not going to get closer, but it's going to get these little rewards. So there's a nice decision there. But also, in a way, restricting it to one ship does remove a decision because you can't think through all the possibilities of what those things will give you. You just think, oh, which ship's the best to move right now in that moment? So it kind of takes away a little bit of that decision. And I would guess for the cartography points, it's probably the same reason of like, if you can do too much on your turn, you start to hijack the game and you start to think through all the possibilities of your turn and what this would do and what this would do. And if you can start chucking out tiles so easily, I think the turns would be longer in those moments. Maybe there's a bit of power abuse in the game of like this really smart player knows how to use them in the right moment at the right time, and they would snowball more than other players who don't use them well, maybe. So there's obviously some reasons for that. I mean, I knew those two rules from my very first game, so it never bothered me, I guess, because I knew it was a thing. But yeah, if you didn't know the rule and played it one way, then didn't realize that was a rule and have to play the other way and don't like that way as much, I can totally get that. But yeah, I think it's important in game design to try and remove rules where you can. But there are definitely cases where the game needs the rule. And as much as you try and fight it, you try and make it intuitive, you try and make it so that players aren't going to slip up or not going to forget it. But there's always going to be weird cases where it's like, this just needs to be in the game for good reason, even if we can't see what the reason is up front, maybe.
Just another example of that spectrum, the trade-off between balance and streamline. You know, those two things are often in tension, like really in tension. Like if something wants to be 1.75 points, well, you know, some people will say, screw it, it's 2 points. And others will say, we'll make it a point and we'll immediately give them a coin, which is worth 0.75, which would be more rules adding the immediate thing. And it's just like, where do you land on that spectrum? Like the one in this game that I often would forget was the whole, remove everything from your market. And really for me, it was like, oh, do I have space to hold this? Move it up there, then remove everything that I couldn't have held. So yeah, there are a few like niggly things. I'm sure that they're there for a design and balance reason, but you're right to question that like it is affecting the streamline, and ultimately they decided to land the plane towards balance rather than streamline in those areas, I suppose.
And kind of what also made me ask this question is in preparing for the podcast, I found a sheet on BGG, which is like an FAQ for like rules that are easy to forget. So it's like when a game needs a page and a half of reminders about rules that are easy to forget, the question is, could it have been done differently to kind of eliminate some more of those easy to forget rules? I don't know.
I mean, yeah. We designed inventors, so
I was going to say, like, we're far more guilty
talk, you know what I mean?
Than this game is. So, like, we're guilty. Like Viscounts as well. There's so many little chains of actions that can happen on each turn. Like, you know, when you build a building, 17 things fire off. So, like, we're guilty of this a lot, and we're not saying that we know how to perfect this. We're just saying it's a thing that you have to consider in game design, and that doesn't mean that there's always a right answer. And the answer is not always remove the rule. The answer is usually like, what is the best rule to make this thing work in the game? And, you know, obviously it doesn't work for everybody. There's always a rule that bothers someone in some game for some reason. But I think overall this game is very intuitive. I'll just make a few comments, I guess, on that, is that like everything is spelled out for you in the graphic design of this game. So from a product point of view, this game is really, really good. The graphic design's amazing and stuff, and the layout. So even just down the side of your playboard, it spells out the ABC phases and what you do in all those phases. So like that last C phase, the reset kind of phase, there's a lot of steps to go through, but I always found it quite easy. Let's just walk through them. Boom, 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 boom. They're quite fast. Pay your people, get your people back, you know, score points for your statues. It's all spelled out right there for you. And even the income, it's all on the left-hand side of your playboard. It's at the very top corner. And then any ships you've built are right there as well. So very clean system, really easy to teach. And often when you're playing the game, you ask a question like, oh, what's the thing about paying to put a token on someone? And there it is right in the middle of the main board is the cost for doing that action. So everything's kind of explained very clearly, and you don't have to look at the rulebook much unless it's one of those kind of more rare edge case rules that you're talking about where maybe you need some more clarity. But overall, I think they did a great job of the iconography in this game and just the layout of everything. It just spells it out for you as you're playing, which means that you can just play the game and not get bogged down by little niggly rules.
We hope you've enjoyed our discussion about Cooper Island, but we'd love to hear from you. Jump on the Garphill Games Discord and let us know in the podcast channel if you've played Cooper Island. How did you find the way resources and points are handled in this game? Does any other game come to mind that makes gaining resources or points really fun? So guys, to finish the podcast today, what is your favourite overlooked or underrated game?
So there are a few games that kind of made my list on this, but a lot of them actually do have more like recent reprints, which are getting a bit more attention, so to kind of cross them off. But one card game I just wanted to bring up was a game called Capital Lux. I was actually given this game while at Essen, it must have been like 7 or 8 years ago, by Pixie Games, our French partner. They just gave me this game, like, oh, it's one we're releasing soon in French, so it's a language-free game anyway. Here's the game, and I went back and played it when I got home, and it's really cool, very clever, small box card game where you are playing down cards on your turn. It's been a long time, so I'm going to try and remember it, but it's going to be probably a bit hairy. But I think in general, you try to either play a card from your hand down onto a public area to then basically take the action of that particular card you play, and also increasing the value of that faction, all them factions, different colored cards. Or you're playing a card down into your own personal tableau to try and basically have the most points in that faction at the end of the round. So it's got this tension around like trying to bank points versus trying to make those points more worthwhile or do cool, crazy things with the actions of those factions. So really small game, like maybe like 50 cards or something, and some gold tokens. There's not much to the game, but had some really interesting layers and decisions, a little bit of deduction, and kind of trying to read the players' hands and figure out what they're up to. So if you were looking for like a small card game that's got some good interaction and plays quickly, I think Capital Lux is one of those games that most people maybe have not played or heard of, but it's actually a really solid game.
My game is quite a small game. It's an area control game that plays in 20 to 40 minutes, and it's called Rumble Nation. So it came out a while ago in 2017, and I played it, I don't know, some years after. But I just remember it being like such a clever little game that I thought, this should be a classic, but obviously I don't think it is. So I think it's a bit underrated. So basically what you do in the game is you have a map of Japan, because it's about feudal Japan, and it's broken up into territories, and each of these territories has numbers from 2 to 12, basically all the numbers that 2 dice can create. And you roll 3 dice, and you then determine, based on those 3 dice, you take 2 of them to choose the territory that you're going to place troops on, and the third one determines how many of your troops you're going to place on that territory. And basically you go around doing turns like that, and there's like a little thing that, like, one time you can choose to instead use these tactics cards, which is a row of cards which are all up, and you can use one of them, and it does something special, about moving troops around the map or whatever. And then basically once everyone's placed all their troops, then you just resolve all the battles, starting with 1, going up, with 2, going up to 12. And basically whoever wins the battle gets to reinforce any adjacent regions where they have troops. Okay. Now this is really interesting because you can either choose to try and spam units onto a few regions to try and get points, or you can try and spread out so that you can then reinforce the adjacent regions. And then so there's this real puzzly aspect of like, where am I going to place my troops on the map? And then the regions are worth the amount of points written on them. And the fact is that they get resolved from 2 up to 12, means that if you want to chain reaction those reinforcements, you need to win the lower numbers to then hopefully reinforce to win the higher numbers. So it's got like all these little tensions going on between if you want to spread or you want to group up. Then it's also like just a dice chucking game, because you're just chucking dice and then deciding based on those 3 dice. And yeah, that's fun because it's hard to place 6 units on the 12 number because you'd have to roll 3 6s, right? So it's really clever. Played it a few years ago, but I'd love to play it again, and I think it would be a good game to check out.
That sounds super innovative. I really like the look of that. It looks like they've also got a deluxe edition coming out, or that has come out recently. So rad. Awesome. So my game is a game that I haven't played for a while, so I might forget some things. But this is a game that was recommended to me by my friend Kenny, who designed Scrap. and it is called New Angeles. So my criteria for underrated games was that they weren't in the BGG top 1000. This game is ranked 1489 at the current time, and there's over 3,000 ratings, so it's not unheard of. It's quite a well-known game, but the average rating is 7.1, which isn't bad by any stretch, but it's also much, much lower than how I perceive the game to be if I were to rate it. So this is a semi-cooperative game where there is probably a hidden traitor, and all other players would lose if the hidden traitor wins the game. So there's this cooperative element to it that, like, we need to make sure that the hidden traitor doesn't win so that we all have a chance of winning. But then, apart from that, any number of players could win, and the way that they win, the cards usually say it's a hidden card that you got at the start of the game, and it will say something like, Sam, you need to have more money than Zach, or Zach's corporation. And Zach might say, oh, Zach, you need to have more money than Shem to win the game. And so if I have more money than Zach and Zach has more money than Shem, then we could both win. We could both win together. And Shem might say, hey, have more money than Sam, or Shem might be the hidden traitor or whatever. So there's a really interesting tension there in how you do your negotiations with people, because you don't want to help the person that you need to beat. But then you're also trying to figure out who's trying to beat you and if that's going to be detrimental to you or not. You don't want to give away too much what your ambitions are. So I think that's really interesting way of doing semi-cooperative games. But the other thing that I think that it does really, really well is that while you're trying to figure out who the hidden traitor is, the game gives people these incentives to act a little bit scummy and to act a little bit dirty. So it makes it a little bit murky trying to figure out who the bad guy is, because we're all acting a little bit bad. And how they do that, from what I remember, is that players will earn money. They've got another secret card. They will earn money at the end of the round based on the status of the city in these key areas. And so, for example, I might have a secret card that says I'm running the pharmaceuticals companies in the city. And so I will earn lots of money if sickness gets really, really bad. So I'm sort of benefiting from sickness going bad. So I'm going to act really scummy in the area of the health of the city. And people might think, well, he's being the traitor here. He really wants us to collapse. But actually, I'm just earning money from people being sick. Whereas the traitor wants everything to go bad. So it gives players these really interesting incentives for being scummy and dirty. And it's delightful. When Kenny told me about this game and recommended it to me, he said, the game will be at its best if one of the players throws their toys out of the cot in order to get a foothold back into the game. And I prefaced our game with my friends with this warning saying, hey, this is when the game is at its best. There might be someone that throws their toys out of the cot in order to come back into the game. And this exact thing happened. My friend felt like they were completely out of the game. So they said, right, I'm going to vote alongside. They were not the saboteur. They were not the hidden traitor. But they said, right, I'm going to vote alongside the hidden traitor because I can't win the game anymore. And we had to bail him out in order to make sure that he would keep the game alive. And then he ended up winning the game with some other people because we bailed him out and gave him a lot of money. And so I thought that was a hilarious moment. I actually thought that was good strategy for my friend, although one of my other friends was not too pleased with that little tantrum. So, hey, I think it's a really interesting game. It's sure to make people feel something. It's very evocative. It's very emotive. And maybe some people will hate it, but others will love it. Have either of you played it?
No.
New Angeles?
I have. I can see Zach smiling the whole time you're talking about it, though. So we'll probably play it sometime soon.
I was just imagining how much of a good time it sounds.
I think I've played it 2 or 3 times. It's a really great game. I wonder how much flack it got, or not flack, but lack of praise it got, because it borrows a lot from BSG. Same designer, so fair enough. But the event system is kind of the same, where there's these events that get revealed, and then as players, you're secretly trying to bid to try and make certain things swing a certain way for your benefit. And it works well in both games. But personally, I have had way more fun with New Angeles than I have with BSG. So it's faster. It's more of a tight, round product as a game rather than a big drawn out affair. So it depends what you look for in a game, I guess. But yeah, good game.
Thanks for listening to the Lens and Veil podcast. This podcast is brought to you by Garphill Games. You can follow Garphill on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, X, and YouTube, or by joining the Garphill Discord server.
Yeah, eat the microphone. Do it.